Now, what we're trying to do here in our UI is we want to get all these controls into arrays. And the question you might be having is, why am I doing this? Why am I putting all these things in an array? This is really tedious. We've got all these controls, and we've got now 4 arrays, maybe 5 arrays, just on the UI. The buttons up here for, I guess I'm calling these hold buttons. Here's the roll button. That's not an array. These buttons are in an array. These buttons are in an array. These text fields are in an array. These text fields are in an array. So we have arrays everywhere. And the question is, why do we need them? The answer is so that we can process these controls in the loops. There are times when we want to disable all the roll button or all the scoring buttons. If we didn't have them in arrays, we'd have to do each one sequentially. So that'd be 13 lines of code when we'd want to disable it. And now when we want to enable it, another 13 line of code. If we want to clear all the scores without the arrays, we'd have to do those sequentially as well, and that would be 13 lines of code. If we want to add up all the scores, we'd have to go through and add them sequentially. So in the constructor for the frame class, it seems really tedious to be setting up and linking all these arrays, but you'll find that in our later coding, it makes it so much easier to do the processing that it's worth the effort here at the start to actually get these things into array-like structures. So that's why we're spending so much time on this constructor part. Now there's a few arrays that are missing that I want to flesh out now that we have the names completely done. We have our hold button array. We allocate the array. Well, the first thing I suppose is making sure that we have all of those addressed down here at the bottom. Make sure those arrays are made. There's 3 toggle button arrays, one for the hold buttons, and then one for the upper scoring categories and the lower scoring categories. And then we have 2 arrays of those text fields, the lower score text box array and the upper score text box array. And then we have this thing called the hold array, which isn't a control array, but it just tells us whether or not we're holding the die or not when we roll. Those are all of our arrays. And now we have to fill them up with stuff. So that's what this is all about here in the control. So first we create our hold buttons array, and then we attach each one of our hold buttons to that array. Hopefully by now you've renamed all the hold buttons to hold button 1, hold button 2. Make sure the array is called hold button array and not hold buttons. And notice we're numbering them from 0 to 4. Here is the upper score toggle buttons. These are the aces through the 6s. And so we've got toggle button aces, and these have been renamed. So I can take that comment out. And those are just notes to myself to remind me. It's called upper score button array. And notice that we're starting at 1 instead of 0, just because this is the aces button, which means 1. So it'd be really kind of odd to have aces be 0 and 2s be element 1. So we're just ignoring the first element. This array has 7 elements. We're only using 6 of them. Okay, but we've got that sorted out. And then we have this lower score button array. Now we're going to keep this 0 relative, right? See up here we added one when we allocated it, or when we constructed it. We added one more than we had so that we could do this strange numbering. But here we don't need to do that. But notice that the only one we have done so far is the 3 of a kind toggle button. That's the only one in the array. The rest of them, the array elements are there, but they're just not pointing to anything, or they're not referencing anything. So what you need to do is, I'm going to copy this line of code because I don't want to type all that, and then put in the rest of the scoring categories. So this would be 4 of a kind, right, is next, and change that to 4. And all I'm doing here is, I think next is full house. So I'm just following the score sheet. and just making sure I get the names right. After full house, there's small straight, all right? And remember our abbreviations. I think we spelled out small and then straight was abbreviated. Yeah. Large straight. I think Yahtzee's next. Large Yahtzee. And then finally chance. Remember there's 7 of these. And now we have our lower score button array complete as well. This is no longer temp. Okay, it's done. Okay, so we have the buttons done. Notice that I've started on the lower scores, I've started the text box arrays, and I say fix me. And the fix isn't here really, it's completing the rest of these. Just like here, we have the array of toggle buttons, but now we're going to need the array of text fields. All right? And so I've done the first one for you, but we also have to do the rest of them. So again, tedious as all get out. You do the same thing, but this is a different array. This is the array of text boxes, not the array of toggle buttons. And we do the exact same naming. Okay, that's done. So we have the upper score button array, we have the lower score button array, we have the lower score text box array. What are we missing? Anybody know? Yeah, the upper score text box array. To keep the pattern going, here we've done the buttons and we've done the text box. Here we've done the buttons. We probably want to put it right here. The first thing you have to do is you have to create the array. A lot of people, they forget to construct the array before they start assigning elements to the array. I did that last night when I was running through this kind of as a trial run. So let's get the name right. Upper score, and this is our text box array. Now we've already declared it below as a private instance field or instance variable. And again, it's one relative. So we can make that same comment. One relative. What that means is as we start counting at 1, which is atypical in programming. And then we do our constructor like you normally do. This time we're making J text fields. And then what's its size? It's going to be the same size as the button array. It's the same number of scoring categories. So we go over to our game model, which we've already created. We use the class name because we're just trying to get a public constant from there. We're not calling a method, so we don't need an object. And we get the num upper score cats. And we're adding 1 to it because we're doing that weird one relative thing. A semicolon at the end. Okay. So now we've allocated the array, but our array is filled with empty elements. The array doesn't point to anything yet. There's no references to elements yet. So now we say upper score text box array. And again, we're starting at 1. And then, do we really have to use the keyword this? And the answer is no. The reason I use the keyword this is because, well, I'm lazy. I don't want to have to try to remember what the text box is called. So what I do is I say this dot, and it gives me a nice little list. And I can look at my text box array, and I'm looking for aces. Using this is kind of a crutch, but it helps me not have to remember the actual name. And it doesn't slow down the code at all. If it did, I wouldn't include it. I think I can guess the rest of the names, though. It's not called txt4s? Isn't that what we called it? Let's see what we called it. TXT, where's 4s? Looks like I missed that one. Okay, so let's go back to our design and see what happened to 4s. Here's 4s. TXR 4s. Yeah, I can't type. Okay, so TXT 4s. That's better. And then 5s. And finally 6s. Now, a common error that you can have when you're coding is you create these things called pasting errors. Currently, I have a pasting error, right? I've gone in there and I've cut and pasted, but I forgot to change something. And I forgot to change these indices here. So all of these are going to be set to the first element, and all the rest of the elements are going to be empty. These are really, really hard to find later. So when you are cutting and pasting, make sure you're also thinking, because all you're doing is causing problems for yourself later on. These pasting bugs are difficult to sleuth out once they're in there. Okay, ooh, that was tedious. Do we have our arrays filled up now? We have our hold buttons. We have our toggle buttons for the upper scoring categories. We have our text box array for upper scores. We have our toggle button array for the lower scores, and text box array for the lower scores. So I guess we're good. And this is where this etc., etc., etc. stuff is. We can take that out finally, because we've done all the work now. Here's our hold array. Here's our game model. We go before the first roll. So at this point now, I think we are finally done with the renaming, and we've got all the arrays set up, ready to go for the next piece.